Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining our current YR Live. We're excited to have our Lieutenant Governor here tonight, and my name is Brett Barker. I'm privileged to serve as the National Committee Man for the Iowa Federation of Young Republicans. I'll let Ashley introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. I am the chair of the Iowa Federation of Young Republicans.
We've been having a series of these and have had really good interactions, so we're excited tonight. So if you do have questions for our Lieutenant Governor, make sure you put those in the chat and we'll try to watch for those and pull those out as we can. But one thing that we're excited about is our Lieutenant Governor does qualify as a young Republican, so we're excited about that. He's right here in our demographic that we're talking to, and so thanks for joining us tonight, Adam.
Hey, thanks, Brett, and thank you, Ashley. Thank you both for your leadership in helping found the Young Republicans organization here in Iowa. My understanding is we were actually one of the last states to put together a Young Republicans organization. So glad to see you step up in that leadership role and give us an outlet to be able to talk about issues that are important to us, support the candidates that support our values, and further organize our efforts. So really appreciate the leadership each of you has shown. Not just in this respect, but also in your personal and professional lives as well. I know Brett is also the mayor of Nevada, Iowa, and serves in a number of capacities. I know Ashley's very involved in the community as well, and just respect and admire both of you. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I also want to say on behalf of Governor Reynolds, thank you as well. Governor, I'm sure would love to be a part of one of these conversations. I wish I could tell you or describe to you how she has just been working around the clock during this incredible time in our nation's history and our state's history. And I'm very fortunate to have a behind the scenes view of that every single day. And with the COVID-19 pandemic and of course the civil unrest we've seen, on top of that, the legislature is back in session here in Iowa. So we're balancing so many things here in the state of Iowa, and I really respect and admire the leadership that she's shown. And I'm very honored to represent her, represent our team, represent the state of Iowa all day, every day, but on this call tonight as well. It's kind of odd that we're not able to get together in person as we normally would, perhaps at a happy hour or something like that. But I like the fact that we're being adaptable and making do as best we can. I think that's going to be the key in this election season. Whoever can adapt to this fast changing environment, I think, is going to have the upper hand. And I think we have the capability of doing that. We've shown that on a number of fronts within our party. And I think that'll bode well for us in November. And there's so much at stake. Obviously, we've got the presidency of the United States at stake, but also specifically for Iowa. Senator Joni Ernst is on the ballot this year. She's done such an outstanding job for us, and we need to keep her as our advocate in Washington, D.C. I'm really excited about the 4 congressional nominees that we put up for the Republican Party. I think we should be very proud of the folks that are carrying the banner for us, and I'm looking forward to doing anything I can to support their efforts. Of course, we've got the state legislature with every seat in the Iowa House is up, half the seats in the Iowa Senate are up. And along with these elections are all the consequences that come with them at the federal level. One of the things I think about as somebody who is a law-trained individual is I think about the federal judiciary and what's at stake. I saw a stat today that President Trump had nominated and is close to confirming 200 judges to the federal judiciary. But what a lasting impact that has, and what could another 4 years mean for the federal judiciary and the rule of law here in the United States? So, I guess I realize I'm rambling here, so I don't want to take up too much time. But again, I just want to say thank you. I think that brighter days are ahead. Governor Reynolds continues to find ways to continually open up our economy and give Iowans the opportunity to exercise the freedom that they so much appreciate and deserve, give the opportunity to support themselves and their families. I think that's so important in light of the impacts that COVID-19 has had. In fact, just today, Governor Reynolds signed another proclamation that further opens up our state and gives us more opportunity. And And I think that's a good thing for us. That's a good thing for the state of Iowa. It's a good thing for our economy. It's a good thing for our psyche to continue to move in the right direction. And I think we've done it the right way, looking at data and numbers and metrics and facts on the ground here in Iowa and what we know about the disease and how it spreads. And I think that's put us in a strong position to lead the recovery as well. So with that, again, thank you very much. I'm happy to answer and take any questions you've got.
Sure. You hit on COVID and the response a little bit from the administration, and I know I've seen lots of photos of you interfacing with food pantries and food insecurity. So what types of things have you done in your role to carry out the governor's initiatives right now?
Well, thank you. So yeah, Governor Reynolds has created a Feeding Iowans task force, and she's had me lead that. And that's dealing with the food insecurity issues that we've seen come up as a result of the pandemic, with the incredible economic impacts that the pandemic and the response measures had on Iowans and created a rapid increase in our unemployment rate. That meant there were a lot of people who went from maybe being pretty certain where their next meal was going to come from to maybe not being so certain about that. In fact, we saw a pretty massive spike in utilization of the food banks and food pantries in requests for food assistance. The food pantries and food banks set records in terms of the amount of volume of food that they moved in March and April. And I think May will prove to be the same as well. And so I'm really honored and proud that Governor Reynolds asked me to lead that. You know, she's had to balance so many different issues, and the decisions that she's had to make have been incredibly gut-wrenching, with major impacts on our economy and on public health and on education. But one of the things she prioritized is food insecurity, and she did so by creating this task force, by tasking her lieutenant governor with leading it. And so what have we been doing? Well, first of all, we've been trying to raise awareness of the help that is available for Iowans. With that massive increase in unemployment in a very short period of time, there were folks who had never needed to get help with food assistance, who maybe didn't know how to navigate the system or didn't know that there was help available or where to find it. And so we've been working to raise the profile of the issue and help Iowans understand where they can get help, and that there's no shame in doing so. This is something that impacted so many Iowans who have, you know, through no fault of their own, they found themselves in this position. So we've been working hard to deal with that. From a workforce standpoint for the food banks, most of the food banks rely on the elderly as their consistent volunteers. Well, this is a virus that impacted the elderly really significantly. So we had to think creatively about how we can meet that demand, the increased demand that they have right when their volunteer base also gets undercut. And so we've been working to find ways to do that. So we've had the National Guard that's been deployed to assist with food banks. We've partnered with AmeriCorps members who have maybe had their normal projects canceled and reassigned them to food insecurity and helping out at the food banks. The religious community has stepped up greatly, where we've seen churches who have taken food insecurity on as their mission during this time. And we've been able to meet that demand, meet that increased demand. So I'm really proud of those efforts. We've also been working on helping the food banks acquire food. One of the things that we've seen is there was a major supply crunch, and it continues on a couple different fronts. First of all, you had the meatpacking plants in Iowa that had outbreaks, had to slow down or even shut down their facilities for a while, and they weren't able to produce, and it made it difficult to acquire food. And it also put our hog producers in particular in a tough spot and forced them to make some really difficult decisions. Well, along with the Department of Agriculture and this Feeding Iowans task force, working with the Food Bank Association here in Iowa, we created a program called Pass the Pork, where Iowa pig farmers could donate pigs. They would be processed, and the meat would be donated to the food banks. And I'm happy to report that we've crossed, I believe, the 50,000 pound threshold for that program, 50,000 pounds of donated pork to the Iowa food banks as a result of that. And we're also looking to expand that into beef and also make some turkey purchases and working on solving other problems that the food banks and food pantries are seeing as they're dealing with this rapidly increased demand. So I'm really proud of these efforts, really honored to be involved. You know, Brett, you and I have another connection beyond just being friends and office holders, et cetera. We both serve on the board of the Hoover Presidential Foundation. And of course, Herbert Hoover, known for helping feed those in need in Europe after during World War I and after World War II. Feel like trying to channel some of his amazing efforts. Certainly, I'm not in that ballpark, but it's one of those things where Iowa feeds the world, and we certainly can't see Iowans go hungry on our watch. And so we're doing everything that we can to meet that need and meet that demand during this very unique and challenging time.
So I'd like to stick on the COVID talk just a little bit longer. You mentioned earlier that one of the biggest lessons, is being adaptable for people who are going through elections and running for office. I want to talk to you a little bit more about what do you think is the biggest lesson we're learning as a society, maybe here in Iowa, as a public official? What are some of the things we're going to go on 5 years from now? We're going to be like, that is really where we learned something new.
Well, geez, I mean, I think there are so many lessons learned. It's hard to focus on any one. Why don't we go with one kind of personal one and one kind of professional one? On the personal side of things, I hope that others have had the opportunity that I've had, which is to slow down just a little bit and spend a little more time with family. I will admit it has been kind of nice. I've got 2 young kids, just finished up 3rd grade and 1st grade. Normally in April and May, we would be going every single night to ball games and karate class and gymnastics and dance class. And it just would have been really almost every night of the week. And a nice thing was we were able to spend some more evenings together and enjoy each other's company and have just a little bit slower pace, and gives you, I think, more of an appreciation to spend some time with family. And I hope others were able to have an experience like that as well, because it can be an isolating feeling if you haven't had those opportunities. So one thing I learned is, well, it's okay to slow down a little bit and to spend some of that time. On the professional side, I think one of the things that I'd highlight is broadband connectivity and how important that is to everyday life, and how it became especially important during the pandemic on a number of fronts. And this is an issue that's been a priority of the Reynolds administration from day one. She has tasked me to lead the Empower Rural Iowa initiative. And one of the things that we've been looking at is connectivity in rural Iowa. Well, what this pandemic did, I think, is shine a spotlight on how important connectivity is. I think folks our age certainly have understood that and really demand that. But when all of society and all of economy and all of the education system really demanded connectivity, it really shined a spotlight on how important that is. Think about it from the perspective of education, right? On one day we were able to have the kids go to school as normal and receive their instruction as normal. And then the next day we had to shift to a different model, and connectivity became really important. My kids go to a school where they were able to stand up an online learning platform really quickly and did a great job with it. And we had good enough connectivity where it never was an issue. But what if we lived in an area where we didn't have that connectivity? That would be a real challenge. And there are Iowans who face that. What about teleworking? So many businesses had to shift very quickly to a model where folks were staying and working from home. And I'm sure many businesses already had that capability, but to have everybody doing it all at once was certainly a different model. Even in state government, we had agencies, very large agencies in state government, that essentially had policies prohibiting working from home, who in a matter of days had to stand up a system that would allow folks to be able to do that and be able to meet Iowans' expectations of the services that they receive, and they were able to do that. What about telehealth? Another great example of how important connectivity is. This pandemic, frankly, required us to utilize telehealth in ways we never had before, so that Iowans could be evaluated without going into a clinic and potentially exposing the healthcare workers there or the other Iowans who were waiting to receive treatment. It became really incredibly critical. So I think that's something, that's an issue that's going to take even greater importance. As I said, it's been a priority of our administration from day one, but this is really going to elevate that and change the conversation going forward.
And so to follow up on that a little bit, Ashley hit on a really good question because that's what I was reflecting on earlier today. When I think about everything going on in 2020 between the pandemic and now, we're talking about race relations and law enforcement and criminal justice reform and some really heavy topics. And I know when I think through American history, there are some years that really pop out. In the last century, we had 1929, 1941, 1968, and then we got to 2001, and now 2020, I think, will be one of those years that the history books really stick out and people point to. So what can young people do to make sure that when we talk about that in the history books, it was a seminal moment for positive change?
Well, that's a great question. And I think the appreciation for history that we both have really shining through in that question. You're absolutely right. This is a year of really watershed change. Or at least it has the opportunity to be a year of really watershed change. What I would encourage the members and really all citizens is, here's an opportunity to get engaged. If you've been sitting on the sidelines wondering if you've got an opportunity to make a difference, well, let me be the one to tell you that you do have that opportunity. It's right here. It's right in front of you. It's time. It is time to engage. There are plenty of opportunities to do so. We can be a part of this important conversation that we're having nationally, and that can take a lot of different forms, right? It can take the form of, back to our conversation on the Feeding Iowans efforts. Maybe it's just deciding that you're going to dedicate your time supporting the local pantry or helping out at the food bank, or maybe delivering Meals on Wheels for seniors who are homebound and perhaps especially lonely at this time. That's a way that you can make really positive change in a concrete way. You're going to be helping people have meals who might otherwise maybe otherwise wouldn't have had that opportunity. There's also an opportunity to be engaged in the broader conversation about what does justice look like in our state? What's fairness? And I think this is one of those moments where there's an opportunity to unite, and there's also an opportunity to further divide. And what's it take for folks to unite? Well, it takes people of good faith and good hearts to come together and be willing to have conversations, even if they're sometimes uncomfortable, even if it forces you to challenge some of your preconceived notions or beliefs, and engage in those conversations. And so I guess that's all a long way of saying, if you're sitting on the sidelines, now's as good a time as any to get involved in it. And I think we'll look back on this year as a really historic moment in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I really appreciate that answer. Thinking about getting involved and having those uncomfortable conversations, I know a lot of people are talking about anti-racism efforts. What are the types of conversations you are having in the office, and what you're hearing around the State House and in your circles about, doing the work and getting uncomfortable to become an anti-racist, I guess?
Yeah, I've been really encouraged by the kind of conversations that we've had. I really think that there is opportunity for bipartisan reforms. The situation that was captured on camera with George Floyd was that absolutely horrifying moment where there really is no possible justification for what happened there. And I think it opened a lot of people's eyes to recognize that there may be injustices that maybe they were blind to, or that they didn't want to admit happened here in the state of Iowa. I'm somebody who, prior to becoming lieutenant governor, I served as the state public defender, and it was a really important opportunity for me because I think it gave me a more balanced view of our criminal justice system and understanding the different values that are at stake within our criminal justice system. So I'm encouraged by the conversations that we're seeing between leaders of both parties in both chambers here as the legislature tries to wind down in the next few days. I think there'll be opportunities there. One of the things that Governor Reynolds has tasked me with doing is leading it's called the Focus Committee on Criminal Justice Reform. And we've been looking at a number of different issues, including how can we smooth the reentry process for individuals who are leaving prison and reentering society so that they can lead a productive life and not return to a life of crime and end up back into that that cycle of recidivism and ending right back in prison. We want folks to be successful. It's better for public safety. It's better for them. It's better for society as a whole. So we've looked at those issues. We also, before any of these, I guess I should say before the George Floyd incident that has really brought a lot of attention to these issues. In fact, it was over a year ago that I think it was about a year ago, I should say, when Governor Reynolds announced that one of the things that we'd be looking at is how to have an unbiased criminal justice system and looking at the racial disparities that are in our criminal justice system. The COVID-19 pandemic kind of derailed what we had planned for those conversations and the timelines. If it weren't for the pandemic, we would have already had a number of conversations in March and April on this issue. And so I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to restart those conversations, especially now that there's increased interest and I think an increased desire to act to make our criminal justice system better and fairer. And so, I appreciate the fact that in this role, I have an opportunity to play a leadership role in those conversations, along with Governor Reynolds and legislators and leaders within the minority community, and to build those relationships, have those conversations in good faith, and work towards meaningful results and meaningful change.
And I'd like to thank both of you for leading on the issue and for having those conversations, because I know for a lot of us, it's not a topic that we've really addressed. And I think probably Ashley and I both would say in our generations, we almost wanted to look at it as something that happened in the history books and wasn't something current. And I think we've all really realized that this is real for a lot of people. And, we may not, for us, you call the police, they're coming to help you. And we don't have that same fear and haven't had those same experiences. So I think, at first it's hard because I don't want to say something wrong because they don't truly understand the full grasp of the issue. And I think I've had to step back and say, I need to listen and I need to learn, because even though I may not fully understand what other people have been through, I need to listen to them and listen to their perspectives. And so I think it's really powerful to have both you and the governor already having broached the subject even before this happened, because you realized that there was a need there
I think it says a lot about her, right? That the governor had issues like these on her heart and on her mind before anybody had seen this video, and before that there were protesters marching in the streets of Des Moines. This is something that we cared about and that she wanted to work on. And between the two of us, we've been building some of these relationships with the leaders that are involved in these conversations for years. And I hope that will put us on a path to be able to be a leader nationally on how we can make things better here in the state of Iowa.
So I think we did get a question in the comments about today's announcement that the Iowa State Fair is being canceled. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that and, the future of events like that in Iowa and around the nation.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just say Governor Reynolds and I support the decision that the State Fair Board made. These are not easy decisions, and nobody knows that better than Governor Reynolds, as she's had to make so many tough decisions throughout this pandemic. We're already looking forward to next year's State Fair. Let's just put it that way. It's such those are dates that we circle on the calendar. Governor Reynolds and I tend to be out at the fair every day, or nearly every day, and have so many different experiences, from showing steers in the governor's charity steer show to eating all the wonderful fair foods that we are able to experience every year. So, obviously it's something that we wish we were able to do, but I know that the folks on the State Fair Board really wrestled with this decision. And it's one of those things, everybody wants to have a state fair, but faced with the facts, it's just one of those things that it was better to make this decision and make sure that as fiduciaries, we're putting the fair in a position to be successful for the long run. So I appreciate what the decision that was made today, and we'll be back better than ever in 2021.
Yeah, I think you hit on a point there too. And I know in the city role, there are some hard decisions you have to make with information that maybe isn't as publicized. And I think you're just hitting on that with the fiduciary duty and the financials behind it. I'm sure that's something, when I first saw the announcement, didn't quite think about. So yeah, there's a lot of considerations with these types of decisions. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
another
Good.
question in the chat that kind of goes along with what we were talking about earlier with race reconciliation. There's also making sure that our law enforcement feels supported. I know that they've oftentimes felt that they're almost under attack in a way too, because while there are bad police out there, obviously, because we all saw that video, I think there are obviously more great men and women out there who are doing it for the right reasons. So what are your thoughts on how we support that? Because you hear defund the police and all these other things being talked about nationally, and so I think it's a fine balance. So I'd throw it out to you to talk about how we talk about those types of issues.
I totally agree. I do think we need to support the vast majority of our law enforcement officers who are doing such an outstanding job, and especially at really difficult times. You look at the past few weeks, and there've been a lot of demands on our law enforcement officers, and I think they've shown really great restraint in those situations, and they've been away from their families, working to protect the citizens of this state, and we really appreciate that. And so, just as much as we need to be talking about real accountability for those who do the wrong thing, we need to talk about real support for those who do the right thing every single day, and know how much we appreciate that. Defunding the police, it's really disappointing that is even part of the conversation. I think real analysis of that would prove that, of course, we shouldn't do that. That would not be protecting the public safety, which I think at the end of the day is the number one rule that government is supposed to play, is to make sure that we're protecting public safety. I don't see how we can do that if the police are defunded, and I don't think that's a constructive part of the conversation. But I do think there are constructive things that we can do to make our criminal justice system better. And as we talked earlier, I think we're taking a lot of those steps, but that's not something that's going to be solved overnight. I think it's a long-term conversation, and we need to be talking just as much about supporting those who are doing the right thing as we are talking about accountability for those who aren't.
And there's a follow-up there I'll ask too, that Stephanie has a good question, because we talked about the fact that you and the governor were already leading on criminal justice reform before this happened. But that gets lost. I think the media doesn't talk about it, and the other side obviously makes it seem like Republicans don't care. So how can we better get the message across, that we as a party in the state were already leading on these issues and continue to lead?
Well, I mean, I think if we're waiting for the media to be on our side and carrying our message, we're probably going to be waiting a long time. And so we probably need to do a better job of telling our story. But I also think the bottom line is, I think history is presenting us with a moment where we have the opportunity for further leadership, regardless of what's happened in the past and regardless of what's brought us here. What are we going to do now going forward? And I think we're in the position to be able to prove that out through the actions that we take and the policies that we work on and the conversations that we have. So rather than sort of, litigating the past or, grumbling about the fact that the media doesn't necessarily give us fair coverage or fair credit for some of those things, you know what, forget about it. Let's look forward. How are we going to do the right thing in the here and now? How are we going to approach this situation? And how are we going to make things better with the facts that are presented today?
Well, Ashley's thinking of one, I'll ask another one. So we had a previous one of these with Secretary of State Paul Pate before the election, talking about what his office is trying to do to make sure that through this, Iowans had the easy access to voting, and what his office was doing. And I know what we saw here in our county, across the state, record turnouts in the primary election. To me, I think that's a healthy thing to have more people engaging in our elections process. So I know there are some different proposals in the legislature right now to restrict some of what Secretary of State Pate did as far as mailing absentee ballot requests and those things. What are your thoughts on some of those proposals that are out there?
Well, I think it made sense here in the primary with the facts that were presented and the situation that we were facing at the time that those decisions were made. Honestly, Governor and I have been so engaged in some of these other conversations and dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, dealing with and talking about some of the criminal justice issues that we've been talking about. I honestly haven't dug into all the details of the legislation that's being considered. And so what we typically do is we just kind of reserve judgment until we see a bill in its final form, because it can change so many different ways through the legislative process. And I think they may be debating that in the Senate tonight, but they still got to go through process on the House side. So, I guess I'm just not going to speculate on where that bill is going to end up, and we'll see where it lands and what the impacts are, because I just haven't had a chance to look at it very closely.
So I kind of want to jump to a completely random topic. This is something I like to ask people when I'm talking to them. I'm a huge reader. I read a ton. So I just love hearing what's a book you're reading, what's a recent book you read, like give us a book recommendation, let us learn.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that I love doing the most. It's one of the ways that I relax. I read a lot of nonfiction. Very rarely do I read fiction anymore, just because if I'm going to spend the time, because it gets harder and harder to spend the time, I want to make sure I feel like I'm learning something and growing as a person. What I'm reading right now is called The Splendid and the Vile by Eric Larson. It's about Winston Churchill in his first year as prime minister, while Britain was coming under attack from Hitler's forces. Really puts things in perspective. We think we've got it bad here dealing with the challenges that we're dealing with here in the state of Iowa. But that's a little different when there's bombs falling down on your city and on your country, and learning a lot about Winston Churchill and his leadership style. And I'm probably about halfway through the book, but it's a really good one. Eric Larson's a really good author. One of the things I like about what he does is he does really short chapters. So you feel like you can pick it up. And even if you've only got 10 or 15 minutes, you can knock out a chapter or two and feel like you've made progress. And so I really enjoyed that.
I haven't read that one, but I read his other one, Devil in the White City,
Yes.
which is about a serial killer. So kind of crazy.
But it's a good book. It's really interesting. I read that one a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of it.
Love it.
I like reading presidential histories. I like reading about leaders. I've also taken an interest in reading about entrepreneurs. And so there's a book that's relatively new called Super Pumped. It's The Battle for Uber. It's about the founder of Uber and sort of the backstory of how that all came together and the various battles that happened. And he ended up, he's no longer the CEO of Uber, and how he went from, founding such a transformative company to being on the outs with his own company. It's just really interesting. And one of the things that I'm prioritizing in my reading this year is just understanding that entrepreneur culture.
That's amazing. Another book, I just got it in the mail, Senator Joni Ernst's new book. So that's my next read. I had to do a plug for that because I just got it yesterday and I'm really excited.
Well done.
I like collecting signed books like that, so that'll be an easy one to get signed one of these days once we return back to normal. But you hit on one too, I'll follow up on, because you hit on entrepreneurship, and a lot of folks our age have more of a negative outlook on capitalism, which built this country and built the things that we enjoy, the technology we're using right now. So how do you think we can better connect to young people who have a negative view of capitalism in favor of socialism?
I mean, I think we need to talk to them in terms that they'll understand and relate to. If we think about it from the perspective of, a disruptive startup, I was just mentioning Uber, so let's talk about Uber, right? Very disruptive to a number of different industries, the taxi cab industry, and there were many regulations at both the city and state level and communities all across the country that essentially would have prohibited Uber's business model from ever happening. I think if you posed that question to young people and said, hey, would you be on the side of a young entrepreneur who comes up with an app that totally disrupts an industry? It makes it a lot easier for you to accomplish something, in this case, getting a ride home at night or whatever the case may be? Or would you be on the side of stifling government regulation, which keeps things the way that they are and entrenches certain special interests? I think most young people, and probably most people overall, would say, I want to be on the side of the entrepreneur, the change agent, the person who's creating something new, rather than on the side of having the government decide that we can't handle this new technology or that it's not safe for us to use it. So I think if we can find ways to talk about free market principles and capitalism in ways that are relatable to people today, I think that's how we break down some of those barriers.
Speaking of young people and policies, what is something that you guys are doing in the governor's office that you're really proud of that's going to, give young professionals a leg up with what policies are supporting us who are early in our career, maybe starting families?
Yeah, for sure. Well, a lot of places I could go with that. I talked about broadband connectivity, and I think that's really important. If we want young people to consider living in Iowa, I think is especially true in rural Iowa. One of the things we got to do is meet some of their basic expectations, which we don't always do. One of those things is ubiquitous connectivity. And so I think that's something that's really important. The other thing I'd highlight is Governor Reynolds has been a real champion for a program we call Future Ready Iowa, but it's really about making sure that we're training young people, well, really all Iowans, with skills that are needed to fill the jobs that are available. Before we headed into this pandemic, the biggest economic problem we had in the state of Iowa is that we had more jobs than we had people to fill them. And so we were working on how can we retrain Iowans to fill these jobs in what is a changing economy as technology becomes more ubiquitous. It's just changing the types of jobs that are available. And so I think if we can do a better job of making those connections between especially young people and their interests and connecting them with the right kind of training that will lead them to a job that's going to be here not just today but into the future, I think that opens up a lot of opportunities. And depending on how we do that, I think it can be even more of an opportunity creator. So let me give you an example. The apprenticeship model, I think, is one that we can be using even more than we already do. And the interesting thing about apprenticeships is you have the ability to earn while you learn. You don't take on student debt. You can do them relatively quickly, and you can walk into a career that's in a high demand field and be very adaptable. I think that's something that would be really attractive to young people if they're given those opportunities and those connections are made earlier on in their education before they've taken on tens of thousands of dollars or more in student debt, taking on a degree. I'm somebody who has a 4-year degree and went on to law school, and it was the right thing for me, and it has worked out for me. I'm still paying my student debt, but it's worked out for me. But if we can create some pathways where you don't necessarily need that, and you can go down a path, have a very fulfilling career, not take on that kind of debt, we ought to be supporting those opportunities. And through the Future Ready Iowa program and others, we're doing that. But I think we can continue to do a better job of communicating that and talking about the kind of opportunity that we have in Iowa. The other thing I'd say is Iowa is really unique in the types of opportunities that we have. I mean, where else in this country can you have a good job, a house with a yard if you want it, or an affordable downtown condo or apartment, where you can live in a safe neighborhood and send your kids to really good schools and be a meaningful part of your community? In Brett's case, the mayor of his community. In my case, the lieutenant governor of the state of Iowa. And that doesn't even have to be in the form of elected office. It can be involvement in a nonprofit or in a community organization or something like that. But in Iowa, we're large enough to have those opportunities, but small enough to really, truly have the opportunity to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And I think that's especially attractive to the millennial generation and younger. When you think about, I mean, I've seen a number of articles and polls uh, talking about what is it that motivates a young person? What motivates a millennial? It's that opportunity to make a difference is one of the biggest things. It's not necessarily how much money you make. It's not necessarily the prestige of your job. It's, am I able to make a difference? I don't think there's anywhere in the country that's better than Iowa at giving young people the opportunity to make a difference in their community and their state. And if we can find ways to communicate that, I think that we'll be able to be more attractive for young folks and that they'll see that there are opportunities here right in their backyard.
I absolutely agree. As somebody who didn't grow up in Iowa, I came to Iowa because of the University of Iowa. And so I think having that perspective, I realize how special it is. And I know a lot of my classmates at the university went elsewhere because they could get bigger paychecks and things like that. So, when we have three strong Regis institutions like that, bringing people from out of state, just finding ways to capture those folks and keep them in Iowa. So one of my ideas I'll give to you for free is to credit back some of their out-of-state tuition if they stay after they graduate. So you guys can run with that one in the legislature.
All right, we'll call it the Brett Barker Act.
There you go. Keep more of those out-of-state people here when they're done. I think that would be a great way to keep more young people here. But I guess some other questions we have, we talked a little bit about talking to our generation about issues. Just within the party too, there are differences between age groups. I know Ashley and I hear a lot about our generation wanting to not cede the climate to the Democrats and liberals and talk about conservative solutions to preserve the environment for future generations, and conservation being a core of the Republican Party back in the day. So how do you talk about some of those issues across generational lines as well? I think a lot of young people are afraid to even speak up in the party about some of those things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we have nothing to be ashamed of here in Iowa in the Republican Party. We are a leader in renewable energy. Chuck Grassley is I think he is referred to as the grandfather of the wind industry in the United States. And I think Iowa is the leader or one of the leaders in terms of the percentage of our electricity that comes from wind. That's something that we ought to be proud of. It helps us drive down our energy costs and makes us more attractive to really major employers, large manufacturers who would use a lot of energy. They appreciate the fact that they're able to get energy from a renewable source at a lower cost. It's helped us attract major name brand technology companies like Apple and Facebook and Microsoft and Google and others who have built data centers here in Iowa, partially because their ability to access low cost renewable energy. The ethanol and biodiesel industry, of course, are very important to our economy here in our state, both the ag economy and just more broadly. That makes us a leader in renewable energy. We're number one in ethanol, number one in biodiesel. We ought to be proud of that. We shouldn't be taking shots from anybody on the left saying that we're not strong enough on the environment. We are strong advocates on both wind and ethanol. Before the pandemic hit and disrupted the legislative session, Governor Reynolds and I were traveling all over the state, doing town halls, making the case for the Invest in Iowa Act, which was all about, it was there were a number of elements to it, but essentially it was a tax reform proposal. It was going to fund mental health in our state, and it was also going to fund the outdoor recreation trust fund. And again, going back to that conservation ethic, back to the days of Teddy Roosevelt and what the Republican Party has been known for a long time. We were talking about how we can improve our state and improve our communities, improve water quality and the outdoor recreation opportunities that so many Iowans appreciate. So I don't think we're ceding that ground. I think we just maybe need to do a better job of communicating that, because we are leaders on the environment and on conservation and on water quality. And that's not to say that we've arrived on any of those issues, but I do believe we're leading on them and want to continue to do so.
Yeah, that's super true. I think that Iowa really does stand out in terms of renewable energy, and it makes me really proud. So thank you for your work on that. I want to backtrack a little bit to entrepreneur ship and the talk we had about keeping young people and bringing people into Iowa, and kind of transition that into discussing small businesses. I know that you guys have been really supportive in the governor's office of trying to get help to small businesses here in Iowa post-COVID. So I'd like to hear a little bit about some of the support there, but I really want to hear about, what makes Iowa a great place to start a small business, what policies you guys are putting into place, not just, because of the COVID help, but long-term.
Yeah, well, first of all, let's just talk with the COVID pandemic and what that presented for businesses, because there was such an enormous immediate challenge there when the facts and circumstances on the ground required the decision for closures of so many businesses. That put a lot of particularly small business owners, but business owners of all size, in a really tough spot. And at that time, the federal government was still working on what became the CARES Act, that had some assistance for small businesses through the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and some of the other programs that were designed to help small businesses. And so we were faced in a really short period of time with trying to come up with a way that we can fill that gap until those programs at the federal level became available, and make sure that we didn't see a massive permanent closure of these businesses. And so Governor Reynolds challenged our cabinet, and specifically Debbie Durham, who leads the Iowa Economic Development Authority, to stand up a program in a really short period of time that would provide some help to small businesses. And it wasn't necessarily designed to be a permanent lifeline, but it was designed to be some short-term assistance to help keep the doors open, to make sure that there's a tomorrow where those entrepreneurs can try to get back on their feet and provide services and be a part of their community. Really proud of the efforts that they undertook to make that happen. It was, I'm going to blank on all the numbers, but I believe we started out with about $5 million available, and there was something like $100 million of applications in that first round. And it was just a real challenge. How do we meet this overwhelming need? It was humbling to think about. Since then, we've been able to dedicate significantly more dollars to it, and we've been able to help out many more businesses and give them a fighting chance at another day. And through the phased reopening of the economy, we're giving businesses and small business owners that opportunity. We want Iowa to continue to be a place where small businesses thrive. One of the most rewarding things that Governor Reynolds and I do is we travel all 99 counties every year. And our county visits take a lot of different forms, but one of the things that I really enjoy is we'll often stop and either do Main Street visits, where we pop into a handful of businesses and hear from the entrepreneurs and understand the challenges they faced and the risks they took to start their business. Or maybe we stop at maybe it's a manufacturing plant somewhere in rural Iowa, and meet with the founders and the leadership and the workers there, and understand the value that they're creating and the impact that Iowa small businesses have, not just on the state and not just on the country, but all over the world. These products oftentimes do end up in international streams. It's just amazing. We have visited so many companies. One that comes to mind is American Athletic in Jefferson, Iowa. They make every basketball hoop that you see in the NBA is made in Jefferson, Iowa. Do you know that? It's pretty remarkable. It's pretty remarkable. And and then you start making connections within those supply chains. So you go see where they've constructed the Spalding basketball hoops that are used in the NBA. And then, a month or two later, we end up at another small business that does some metal work, and turns out they're making the rims that go onto those basketball hoops that go into the NBA games and into international competition in the Olympics and all these other crazy things. And it's kind of neat to see the impact that Iowa small businesses have all across the world.
I think that's very true. One of the things in Nevada that I didn't know at first, there's a couple things. One is pizza toppings. So if you eat pizza in the United States, there's a high likelihood your toppings came out of Nevada. And then popcorn makers. So, you go out to DC and you go into Senator Ernst's office, her popcorn maker is made right here in town. So it's pretty neat when you have those stories replicated community after community all across the state.
Yeah, I'll have to keep that in mind next time I come to Nevada, by the way, and maybe check it out. Along
Yeah.
those same lines, so this would have been February of last year, I had the opportunity to lead a trade mission along with Secretary Nag to Colombia and Panama. And one of the things that we learned is that there's a lot of pepperoni made in Algona, Iowa, at a plant there. And so when we were in Colombia, it turned out that one of the restaurants there had won a national pizza making competition, and they used pepperoni that came from Algona, Iowa. And so again, another international connection there. So one of the things I prioritized in my 99 county tour last year was, it was my 98th county was Kossuth County, so I could go visit that plant and check out the pepperoni making process.
That's incredible. We need to find a way that we can compile all of these really amazing facts in one place, because I want to be able to start spitting these out in my daily conversation.
Yeah, let me give you one more then. Okay, along those
Yeah.
lines, West Liberty Foods in Southeast Iowa, they are a turkey processor, and they supply almost all the turkey that's used in Subway sandwiches.
There you go. So
Wow.
young Republicans are going to be really fun at parties with all these facts that we're coming up
I
with.
know. Exactly.
So I guess circling back to more serious topics, one that's left, I know the governor has been a leader on the life issue. What's a good way that we can talk to other and engage other young people on that issue?
Yeah, well, I think this is one of those areas where actually time and science are on our side. And so many times, you talked about some of the issues that we've seeded where, on whether it's the environment or conservation or what have you. Well, so many times you hear from the left saying, well, Republicans are anti-science. I think as technology improves and viability of an infant gets earlier and earlier, and we have more and more technology like the 3D images that you're able to get of an ultrasound anymore, I think that will help people recognize the fundamental humanity of an unborn child. Some of us come to that conclusion because of maybe our religious beliefs or just the principles that we grew up with. But some people need to come to that conclusion through a more logical process. And I think that as science and technology evolves and improves, it'll actually make it easier for us to make that case to those who maybe arrive at that same conclusion, but maybe for different reasons. So I think, again, I think time and science are on our side there. And if we can find different ways to continue to express why we believe life, believe in the sanctity of life, I think we can bring more people into that tent and help people come to that conclusion that so many of us have.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. I kind of want to circle way back to the beginning of our conversation on, talking about getting young people involved. So I'd like to ask you first, what was your first step to getting involved? Before you were lieutenant governor, before you were public defender, what was your first foray into community involvement? And what advice do you have for people? As you mentioned, Brett's already the mayor. I'm fairly involved in my community, but for people who have never taken that step, what is your advice for somebody who's looking to make the jump?
Well, first of all, I had a great government teacher in high school who did a really outstanding job of communicating with students and making these topics interesting. And I don't think I'd be in this position if it wasn't for Mr. Steve Johnson at West Sioux High School, who did such an outstanding job in connecting with me and really motivated me. And I've had great college professors along the way and all of those things. But for me, it's hard to choose, what is the one domino that fell that was the key to all the others being lined up and falling. But I guess I'd start out with, I just got involved with a campaign. I worked on Larry Noble's campaign for Iowa Senate in 2006. And his district at that time was Ankeny and Johnston before redistricting had split those up into different Senate seats. And 2006, I don't know if you remember, was a bloodbath year for Republicans, and Larry's race was one of the only Republican victories across the state that year. And but I learned a lot working in that campaign and just building a relationship with Larry, who was a good candidate and did a really great job, but also learning the nuts and bolts of running a state senate campaign and getting out there and knocking on doors and developing the message and all the things that I got to do and have an impact because it was such a small campaign. But some of the connections that I made and the friendships that I made just through being that intimately involved in one race led me to the next step and then the step beyond that. One of Larry Noble's best friends in the world was Doug Gross, who was an attorney at the Brown Winnick Law Firm. When I was involved in Larry's campaign, it was during my summer before my first year of law school. Well, eventually, I think because I had done a great job for Larry, I ended up making the connection with Doug, and I ended up having an opportunity to have a clerkship at the Brown Winnick Law Firm where Doug worked. And eventually I had an offer to work there and practice as a lawyer there. And connections I made there led me into the governor's office, where I had the opportunity to serve in the Branstad Reynolds governor's office and ran for attorney general in 2014 and made so many connections there that I really appreciate. And when I lost, Governor Branstad appointed me as the state public defender. Great experience doing that. And of course, after 2.5 years as the state public defender, Governor Branstad becomes the ambassador to China, and Lieutenant Governor Reynolds becomes Governor Reynolds, and she chose me. You know, I don't know if any of those things would have happened if it weren't for that original opportunity working with Larry Noble's campaign way back in 2006. And you could probably back it up even further if you wanted to. So what's that mean for all of you? I think what it means is get involved, step in, help out a candidate, do the best job that you can, make as many connections as you can, leave a good impression, work hard and do the right thing. And you'll find that doing that opens up doors that you maybe never could have ever thought would have happened. I never would have thought I could be lieutenant governor or even state public defender or even the nominee for attorney general. But because in every position I was in, I tried to work hard and do the right thing, opportunities came to me. And I guess the second piece of that is you got to be willing to make a bet on yourself and go ahead and take those opportunities when they come. You be selective, be smart about which opportunities you take, but ultimately it's on you to if you're going to take that opportunity or not. That's the philosophy that has worked for me. Work hard, do the right thing, trust that good things will happen for good people.
I love that, and we're sure glad that that journey led you to where you are today.
Yeah, I missed part of that really good answer. It's a good example for broadband connectivity. So we have citywide fiber coming to Nevada this year, and I can't be more excited about that because it never fails I get booted from things like this. But yeah, I think other good examples to get involved, obviously, you can join the Young Republicans. So I'll go ahead and plug our website at iowayr.com. We'd love to have you join our efforts. We'll be engaging in campaigns across the state as we move on towards November to help tip the needle in some of those races that Adam talked about. But yes, we're also running low on time. But yeah, I'd say your central committees, the county central committees across the state would love to have young energy in those central committees. I know when I first started going 10 years ago, I didn't quite have the gray hair yet. So I didn't fit in very well in a lot of those central committee meetings, but we need more young people to engage like that. Boards and commissions at your city level, your local chambers. There's so many great ways to step up and take that first step that Ashley mentioned.
My first foray was into the Republican Women, the Polk County Republican Women, now Capital Region. So there's also groups like that. That was kind of my first step. So.
Well, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, Brett mentioned boards and commissions at the local level. There are so many board and commissions slots at the state level in a variety of different industries. And oftentimes those have requirements for public members. So it's not even necessarily that you have to have expertise in a particular area. As long as you're somebody who, is of a strong mind and willing to provide some oversight and be involved and engaged, there's opportunities out there, and they require most of our boards, almost all of our boards and commissions require gender balance and partisan balance, and so there are set opportunities for Republicans, Democrats, Independents to be involved and engaged, and we'd love to have you apply for those.
I'm a member of the Iowa Civil Rights Commission, and it has been very rewarding thus far. So I also would recommend getting involved on the state level.
I'm on the Iowa Board of Pharmacy, so there you go. You got two state board members right here.
And you just got reconfirmed, right?
I did today.
Oh, yep. Yeah, congratulations.
Congrats, Brett.
Yep. Get to be around for 3 more years. So yeah. Yeah, with that, I don't see any more questions in the chat. Ashley, do you have anything else you wanted to finish up with, or?
No, I just want to say thanks to the Lieutenant Governor. Thanks to everyone who tuned in, and hopefully we can get some of you folks more involved in the Young Republicans moving forward.
Any final words of wisdom for us tonight?
No, thank you again for all that you're doing. Appreciate the leadership that you're showing. And again, I'd encourage everybody, find ways to get engaged. This is a historic moment. It's worthwhile to get engaged anyway. The state of Iowa presents you with unique opportunities to make a difference and to make change. And I think this is as good a time as any to do it. Maybe it's the most important time to do it. And there are so many different ways that you can do so that highlights your specific skills, talents, and interests. And there's no reason not to.
Very good. Well, thanks for coming on. We definitely appreciate it. And for those of you that enjoyed it, we'll continue to have more of these. So we're looking forward to getting the governor on here before too long.
There you go. I'll tell her it was a good experience. You guys do a great job. Tough interviews though. Geez, a lot of good questions.
And tell the governor thank you. We're all thinking of her, and we really appreciate her work right now.
Yep.
You bet.
She's been a strong leader, and we appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.